Thank you guys for being here. How you guys liking the conference so far?
Yay.
Yeah? How many, raise your hand if you work in IT, like officially work in some IT capacity, direct consulting, anything like that? Yeah? How many don't work in IT, work in something totally different, but do IT kind of stuff? Anybody? One, not two, 1.5, 0.5. Okay, and in the PowerShell area, since this is all PowerShell, how many of you have installed and used a module? Everybody. How many have written a module? Okay, 2. Okay, cool. And let's see if we can get started here. So this is not going to be super technical deep dive or anything like that. This is, I hate to say it's going to be a little bit more PowerShelly than, or excuse me, PowerPointy than I think most of the sessions, but I do have some demos, and cross fingers they all work. So what this session is going to be on, first off, if I can operate this thing, come on. There we go. Now, let's say thank you to our sponsors. I know everybody keeps bringing that up, but it's nice that they did this. The food, the event, all the swag, which is really nice. I still can't believe there's stickers left, by the way, so I'm grabbing them. Chocolatey, Pluralsight, Script Runner, System Frontier, Tech Systems, thank you. If anybody's here from them, thank you. I know a few are, right? So appreciate it much. Thank you. So, who am I? Man, this part's kind of, I hate talking about myself. I live in Virginia Beach, about 4 hours away. Been in IT since the 80s. I started out doing programming in the CAD world, so I used to work a lot with AutoCAD and things like that. My first language was Lisp, way back, and moved from that into other stuff, and kind of moved into mainstream IT, I guess around 2007, 2008, around that time frame, right around when the market crashed. Kind of weird timing. And about that time was when I started to appreciate scripting in general. Back then it was what, Batch and VB script, and some people were doing active Perl and things like that at the time, and Kickstart. Anybody remember Kickstart? Yeah. Okay. And there was a lot of cool stuff with Kickstart that I kind of missed when it kind of got kicked to the wayside, pardon the pun. Then PowerShell came along and kind of filled that gap, and then some. So it took off a lot better and more pervasive than I think a lot of people expected. We were talking about that at lunch, by the way. Anybody remember Project Monad when it first came out? Nobody? So it was one of the code names when they first put it out. Here comes Monad. It's a new scripting thing. And it was like, why is there a new scripting thing? We have VB script. And here we are, right? So that's why. So anyways, my background since then has kind of shifted into end-user device management. The way I got there was kind of a weird, long story. I'll spare you the details. I was writing software. I had to get it out to machines in a particular defense company, and became best friends with the SMS guy, and he showed me how to deploy software, and it went from there. So I got really intrigued with what it takes to get things out to machines and then manage them and then monitor them and configure them for drift. A lot of things that have been talked about in other sessions here, so I'll be referring to some of those during this session. So EUD is end user device management. That's what I kind of focus on now. Config Manager, Intune, little AD, Azure AD, group policy, MDM policies, stuff like that. And all throughout all that scripting, so that's kind of how I got here. It's my social media stuff. Anybody follow me on Twitter? Some? How many people here don't use Twitter? Use Twitter. Don't believe all the garbage about Twitter being like for 18-year-olds to like talk about Justin Bieber. It's not that at all, and it's not all political stuff. There's a fire hose of IT information on there, and a lot of it's from these guys that are speaking at the conference, MVPs, Microsoft program managers. They're all on Twitter. Everything that they do hits that before it hits anything else. So if you're hitting it, if you're only going to blogs, only going to mailing lists, people's such and such week newsletters and stuff like that, you're getting it late. Especially InfoSec, cloud, things like that. That stuff's every day. There's something new every day. Gotchas, tips, new releases, new updates. I strongly recommend get on there, tune into the people that are focused on the topics you're interested in, and go with that. So, sorry, gotta go off on a tangent. I go off on tangents a lot. Throw a rock at me. So already covered that. How many have written a module? How many of you have written a module? 3, 4? 4, okay. How many of you have a GitHub account? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Most of you. If you don't have a GitHub account, just create one. Go ahead and do it. It's free. They're not going to mail you or anything or spam you to death. The nice thing is you can look at a lot of stuff and gradually get involved with it. So that's been brought up in a couple of sessions that you can. The whole idea of GitHub is it opens up a two-way communication for people who are writing a lot of these utilities that we'll talk about here that you've probably seen in other sessions. So these really cool widgets, like, wow, that's really cool. You can go look at the source code without an account a lot of times, but if you want to go in there and say, hey, I'd like to see this change, like it's not working for me because I have this one-off exception, but you can add something for it. Put in an issue, right? It's like an open help desk ticket. At the bare least, if you really feel motivated and they really usually appreciate it, contribute and submit a pull request. It says, here, I made the change, take a look at it, if it looks good, roll it in, right? So somebody's session was on DBA tools. Is he here? No? He's in another session. He was talking about how they contributed to DBA tools and how many people are involved with putting in community content on that. So that's a good example. How many people here use Visual Studio Code versus ISE? Good, okay. It's a tough switch for some people. I got to admit, there's still times where I fire up ISE. At least start using Visual Studio Code. You're going to find a lot of benefit to it. And how many of you found a word that rhymes with module? I knew I'd stump you on one. And no, I don't look like a Martian. So everybody knows who I am on Twitter. Okay, so what are we going to cover? This session is going to be about high-level overview of modules. We're not going to go deep. So it's going to be more about how to find modules, when to go looking for modules, and when to consider writing your own module. So we're not going to go into like techniques of how to write modules. We can hit some of that during question and answer time. This is just more about when to buy a laptop versus go to Fry's and buy the parts and make one. Okay, that's kind of a good analogy. It's like people think all the time in terms of software kind of being its own thing. There's a lot of parallels to the real world in software. So make or buy versus kind of things. Which is that one there. And what we won't talk about, won't go into detailed views of PowerShell modules, development techniques, or words that run with modules. Any questions? Yeah?
So it would be helpful to me to have a good understanding of the differences between a module and a PS1 file that that may have multiple functions in it.
Okay.
At what point do you transition from I've got a PS1 file that gives me a lot of functionality versus a module?
Okay. Well, we're going to touch on that actually.
Okay.
Cool. Anybody else? Okay. Throw a rock at me. I'll tend to roll right over stuff. So where are we at? There's 3 levels of pretty much anything, right? Whether it's programming or building a house. There's basic, creating, and mastering, right? So we're going to be about right there. Good thing my animation works. And so, other sessions that I will probably refer to, which I wasn't sure of the timing of this session. I thought it'd be earlier and that these guys would come later. But regardless, when the content comes out for this, because it's being recorded and whatnot, check these other ones out if you haven't already sat in them. The DBA tool session is really good. The sysadmin's path to DevOps, event logs, which Phil Bossman covered, and utilizing pipelines, and also what Fernando's been covering on security. Right, so he's here today. He'll be here tomorrow. So check it out. I'm not going to be here a full day tomorrow, unfortunately. I wish I was, but I'll at least be here for the first part. So what are modules? Modules are toolboxes of tools. That's really all they are. They're not really unique to PowerShell. Other languages have parallels to that. That is, you can bundle them into something, give it a name. It gives you some portability. It gives you some encapsulation, and also gives you an easier way to share it by publishing it. Right? So that's one of the advantages of a module. You can put it in a repo or a gallery, a PowerShell gallery, and find it. You don't have to go find somebody's site and go, oh, download, extract, put it in here. You can, and some of you still have to on older platforms. But if you have PowerShell 5.1 and later, or 5 and later, I can't remember, they added install module. So if you're on like a 2012 server, Windows Server 2012, with PowerShell 4, I believe it is, and you type in install module, it'll say, I don't know what that is, but it knows what import module is. But you got to have the module there to import it, right? We'll talk about what install and import mean. So those are the parallels, right? So a module could be, and modules tend to be context oriented. So you write a module, it's kind of focused on a particular subject. Like I have a toolbox for working on cars, or a toolbox for doing electrical work. That's kind of like a module. I have a module for Exchange, a module for Azure AD, a module for System Center, right? So the idea is that all the stuff that it provides are all kind of related. So get, set, put, test, show, all those different variables, or excuse me, verbs that go in front of those commands are all somewhat context related. That's kind of one of the sort of aspects of a module that makes it different from a script, right? So a script is kind of just, you get the script and everything in there is what's there. But somebody else might go, well, how do I discover what's in that script? That can be a little hard to do. You can add commenting and document it, in which case you're almost making a module, or just make it a module and it's kind of self-discovering. It exposes a lot of the content to the help functions, and also makes it easier to document it automatically. So I'll show you some of that later. That's that right there, and that's another kind of tool. And let's see. So PowerShell modules in the world, this is where I talk, and this little animation just goes in the background. All of these things that are popping up have modules related to them. Some of them are officially supported or provided, and some of them are community. A lot of them are community now. So people will make their own module. Like, okay, this vendor gives me one that's got 10 functions in it. I need 100 because I got all these other things I got to do with it. A good example this morning was DBA tools. They were comparing it to the SQL Server module that Microsoft provides and previous tools that were out there like SQL CMD, and then DBA tools, and how are they different? Like, well, this one has 50 commandlets in it, I think they said, or 60, I forget. And theirs has like 150, because theirs isn't just doing SQL operations. They didn't really cover that in that session, because I use it for a lot of stuff. Anybody using the System Center uses it for a lot of stuff, from just the database side to actually looking at the server. Like, how much memory does it have? What are the files looking like? What are the autogrowth settings on them? All that kind of stuff you can interrogate, in some cases you can set, all from the command line. So that's the kind of power that a module gives you, and then your module fits in over there. If we have to make one, you can make one. And there's still cases where you need one to make one, that is. So a module is not standalone necessarily. Oh, go ahead.
Interesting on that last graphic, people are making fun modules. I mean, not that those modules aren't fun, but I have a module, I got a module for my hue lights, and I can change my hue lights with a PowerShell module. So there's some kind of, I had a Microsoft band, which I think I was the only person, I was the other person that had the Microsoft band, but they had modules that you could query your Microsoft band to get that stuff. So
yeah,
there's more than just IT stuff out there. There's actually some kind of, lifestyle things.
Yeah, you can use them for anything, really. It's projects, work, home, anything you'd want to just build a toolbox. Like if you're building a home toolbox to go work on your own projects, what would you put in the box? That kind of thing. So I had a friend that does IoT stuff with Raspberry Pi, and he's playing with Windows 10 IoT and Raspbian and things, stuff like that. And I think he's trying the PowerShell core side to work with that to automate some home automation stuff. So he was talking about like locking his doors, turning the lights on and off. So I don't know where he is on that right now. I got to follow up on him. But again, on top of that, so when you build a module, do you have to write all the code from scratch? No. So that's kind of where this goes into. A module can lean on other modules. I do it all the time. Most people that write them don't write every line of code. They'll go this far and they go, so-and-so's got a module that does that better than I could write it, so I'm just going to invoke that. And you can make that a dependency. And I'll show you where that gets set in the PowerShell manifest, which is the descriptive file that tells the system what's in this thing, what's it called, what version is it. All that's in a file. And the really cool thing, and I'll get on that later, I keep saying that, is when you set these dependencies and you say install module, and your module needs other modules, Windows will automatically grab those modules and install them while it's installing yours. So you don't have to tell the person, oh, you're going to need this, go get that, okay? So, I ran out of colors. And so in the manifest, which is the PSD1 file, it's a JSON-ish file that describes all the stuff. And one of the lines is required modules, and you put the names. You can daisy chain them in an array. And it just looks down the list and checks and says, do you have it? Do you have it? You don't? Okay, install that one, install that one. That's all. There's a bunch of built-in commandlets for modules. There's find, which will search your default repository. The default repository on Windows 10 is PowerShell Gallery. That's PowerShellGallery.com. You can add others. You can add your own custom ones. There's commandlets built in for adding like internal repos and things like that, or other public ones also. Get is basically interrogating your machine for what's on it. There's two modes generally. Each of these has a lot of parameters you can use to do other things, but when you just type in that commandlet and hit enter, it's going to tell you what's loaded in memory. Okay, so what's actually imported into this session, and I can just type the commands and go. If you type in that with dash list available, it'll show you all the ones that are installed on the system but may not necessarily be loaded. Now that used to be a bigger thing in the past, but now you have auto loading. So if the module's installed, you really don't need to do import module anymore. It's pretty rare you do. There are some cases where you do, but generally speaking, once it's installed, when you type the command, Windows is going to go find it and load the module. That's kind of built into PowerShell 5 and later. So if it doesn't, take a look at it. There was a case, I think, with AWS's module where they had to, I was listening to somebody interviewed where they had to split their module out because they had like exceeded the number of commandlet names in their manifest that it would be able to auto-detect and load. It was like 600 and something, I forget. So they actually started doing what Azure does and break them out by focus, like networking, storage, to get the numbers smaller. So you only load the small numbers you need rather than try to load everything. So import module loads it from the system. Again, you don't really need to do that now. As far as I've seen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen a need to actually explicitly import module anymore. Remove module takes it out of memory, doesn't take it off the system. That's a point of confusion for some people. They think it means it uninstalls. It just unloads it from the session. Install module goes and gets it from wherever you tell it. You can say install it from a file share or from a repo. The default is a repo, so PowerShell Gallery is where it's going to look from. So if you type install module space DBA tools, it's going to go to the PowerShell Gallery and look for it and install it. And installing, I'll show you what that does in a minute. Uninstall removes it from your machine. Update module updates it. Okay, so some of these have some caveats to them. I'll get into that later, but any questions before I move on from here? Okay. Silence is accepted, so find module, there's an example, and then it comes back with that. If it doesn't find it, you get nothing, or it'll just say it didn't find it. So I give you the version, the name, the repo, and that returns an object, just like everything in PowerShell. So you can actually set that to a variable like $x equals find module, and then pipe that out and look at the properties, look at the description, all the details. And what's really cool is, by default, when you ask for an object in PowerShell, it gives you a very minimal set, even though what was passed back was a full set of information. That's why you'll see people do things like pipe select star or get member to like expose everything under the hood. If you do that with this, you'll get everything that you see in the PowerShell Gallery. And if I can jump to that. Oh, come on. No, that's not going to really do it. There we go. And if I go to PowerShell Gallery, and I look for DBA tools.
So we're only seeing the
Oh, you are. Holy cow. How do I do that?
Alt-tab?
I did. It just keeps flickering. It won't go over.
Oh, are you split screening?
Might be.
You may want to clone.
Okay. Hold on. I apologize for that. So I got here a few minutes earlier to try to see if I can make this work. Add it on extend. Thank you. All right. Let me know if there's do I need to make the font bigger?
Control plus.
How's that?
Nope, too big. Thank you.
All right, so if I go to the DBA tools and look at the details on it, okay, you get some properties like here, like package details, who the authors are, the owners, functions, commandlets. These are all exposed through the manifest file. Lots of functions in there. That's all the functions you get when you load it. What versions there are, that's the latest. There's also a file list where it exposes all the files that are in it. So sometimes you'll see things that are compiled. I don't know if this is a good example. You'll see some DLLs in some of them where they compile them. This is actually open, so they're all PS1, JSON. You can open these and look at them. You can go to their either here or on the project site, which would be GitHub usually, but not always. And if you do this through PowerShell and pull it back, you get the same thing. So license info, contact owners. If I do, I'll say M equals find module EVA tools. And I probably need to make that font bigger, don't I? Better?
Yep.
Okay. If I do that, and some modules take longer to pull back because of all the information in them, so some will be right away and some take a few seconds. Let's see how long that takes. How are we doing on time? 20 minutes. There we go. Okay, so if I look at $n, just the bare basics, right? So I do that, do select star. You can see it's actually a lot more coming back, right? So it's all the commandlets that were in there, everything you saw in the portal. So they're just exposing it through an HTML front end. But you know what you can do with this, whatever you can think of. You know, just like everything in PowerShell, they're just Lego blocks, and you can put them together to build anything you want. So I've seen people take the find module output and use it for automating stuff from documentation to all sorts of things. So you get all the information in here that you would get in the portal. Okay. Let's see, dependencies, no dependencies in that one, so everything's self-contained. All right, so, let me jump back. And then just showing you that that's the same thing, right? And that's really pointing to that. So by that I mean PowerShell Gallery. And so finding modules. Da-da-da. We're going to find the module and show how you find the module. So I think I already showed you that somewhat, but let's say it's a little bit limited in how the search syntax is, at least from what I've seen. So anybody here use Chocolatey? Anybody familiar with it? Okay, one. Okay, Chocolatey is a PowerShell, I want to say module. It is module. It has more than one module, but it's a PowerShell layer, I guess you'd call it, for automating installing software and making configuration changes. If you've ever worked on Linux, it's similar to apt-get or yum. So you can just say, hey, I need 7-zip. Go get it. I don't need to go find 7-zip. It goes to the repository again and finds it and brings it down. So there's a search feature in that where you can say, find me a package. And it says, oh, what package do you want? So I did Choco search 7-zip. It'll go out and search and find everything with the word 7-zip in it, right? There's more than 7-zip. But if I do find module and I say GPO, doesn't find anything. But if I do find module GPO doc, shameless plug here by the way, finds a module, happens to be one I wrote, that's why I knew the name of it. So it's a little bit limited in how you can search. So most people will find that it's a little faster to just go PowerShell Gallery and search it. You can do it from the command line, but I haven't found a way to do it here.
You could do a find module, or couldn't you do a GPO asterisk? Find module GPO asterisk?
Will that work? Gotta make me look stupid on camera. Oh, you're right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, I owe somebody a lunch over that one. So they'll thank you and I'll thank you. All right, so there you go.
So you're going to take me to lunch?
Yeah.
Bonus.
Okay, where do they get installed? Any questions before I move on? No? All right. Where do modules get installed? On your system, depending on the operating system version you're on and whether you're running as an administrator or not, you can install modules, by the way, as system-wide or under your user context. Okay, like some software will let you do that. If you install them under system context, they generally will go under program files and program files, Windows PowerShell, no spaces in it, and then modules. And I'm going to touch on this in a little bit, but I'll just go ahead and hit it here since I'm here. When you look at each module in here, under each one, you're going to see a folder with the version number. It's important to make note of that if you do have to, like if you're dealing with air gap machines or machines, like I said, running older versions of PowerShell and you have to manually install the module, a lot of people will grab it and install it and then they'll try to go and just do import and it won't work, all right? Or it'll give you follow the standard and it usually works pretty well, okay? So, and I'll touch on the path. There's also a default path, just like Windows has a path statement where it's a chain of paths that it looks through when you type a command. So if I just type in robocopy or xcopy, where does it find the exe for that? In the default path. PowerShell is the same way. It extends the path to add the modules path and some other things. So as long as you put things in those places, it'll find them, or you can add your own paths to that, which you'll see a lot of modules will do that. Chocolatey does that. It'll do plus equals and add their path to your path, so you don't have to go find it or anything. It'll just be there. Windows will find it. So to do that, what I'll typically do is create a folder for the name of the module under modules, the version, and then extract everything under that. Okay? And if it's for a user, it will be under documents. Except that one's broken. That's a bad example. So here you'd have the name, and then under the name you'd have a version. And then all the stuff under that. Okay? The reason it matters, some modules it won't matter because they're very simple. They'll just have a PSM1 file and a PSD1 file and it won't care. But if they have a folder structure under it and there's some referencing of paths within that module, it can get weird when it can't find stuff depending on how they coded their stuff to look for subfolders, right? So if you move things around, it may say, oh, wait, I don't know where I'm at. And just try to stick to a standard. Usually works pretty well. Just not dinging anybody. I've done it. So there's that. There's the path. So if you type it environment, so in PowerShell, anybody familiar with the env environment variable in PowerShell? Anybody not familiar with it? Okay, it's like the path statement in Windows or DOS, old command shell. You type in path. Same thing comes in with semicolons. If you do a split on it, you can board default paths that it's going to look for modules. Okay, you can add your own, but that's where it's going to look by default. So your username, then the system one. So look for user ones first. Keep that in mind. So if you have any developers in your environment and they're loading modules on their machines under their user profile and you've sent out a system-wide one and they're not seeing the change, it can be a naming conflict where it's looking at the one under their profile first and ignoring the system one. Okay. Any questions? Nope. Okay. Installations, I already covered this, just showing you the folder structure. So that's for system and user. And the breakdown of the folder and version. All right. Measuring pretenses. Sorry, I'm trying to think where this was going to go. So, modify permissions on a folder. So the idea of this is, let's say you, it's hard. Sometimes people have a hard time, like I do, learning something just for the sake of learning it. You have to have a scenario I'm aiming at. I need a problem to solve. I need to copy this file out to 50 machines. I need to shut down these servers after they've been patched, or whatever, or turn off monitoring while they're being patched, turn it back on. I need some sort of a scenario to work against, right? So I wanted to kind of approach this from that and use a scenario like, okay, what are some typical situations that you would be using PowerShell for? Modifying permissions on a folder is one. And again, I've tried to word these around things that you would use other tools for. All right, so some people would say, oh, I can do that with root policy. Yeah, you could. Okay. Or I could use System Center. Yeah, you could. I could use my favorite third-party tool to do that. Yep, you could. But modifying permissions on a folder, not usually right out of the box 3 clicks of a mouse in most products. That's usually something you still have to either go right-click and do it on the folder or do it through the command line, right? That's pretty common. Read from a database. You're still going to write some code to read back information from a database. Whether you do it in one tool or another, doesn't matter. Read from an Excel spreadsheet file. Especially if you're on a machine that doesn't have Excel. Let's say you're on a server and they don't install Excel, but you need to be able to read this information because the job has to run here. It ain't going to run anywhere else. But the spreadsheet, wherever it is, has to be read from here, and I don't have Excel on this machine. How do you deal with that? So I'm going to cover that. And then blue, those are the modules that I would typically use for those. There are other modules for some of these. These are just the most common ones. Check for install Windows updates. So PS Windows Update is a common one. And rendering data to web pages. That's a project of mine, so shameless plug. If we have time, I'll talk about that one. Demo 1. So the idea of this one is modifying permissions on a folder. There's a couple ways to do it. You'll see some examples out on the web. That's one of these linked right here for using the ACL, set ACL property or commandlet in PowerShell. That's one way. Another way is to use iCackles. You can still run any command shell command in PowerShell. So for anybody's not aware of that, most of you are, but in case anybody's not, there's a common perception that you can only do PowerShell in PowerShell, and that's not true. You can run any tool through PowerShell, and you don't always have to wrap it in an invoke expression or start command. You can just say dir or rd to remove a directory. You can also do iCackles, xcopy, robocopy. All those things you can just type them out like you would in an old batch file, and they still work. You just got to watch out for some of the characters that get used. So in this case,
And aliases.
Yeah.
PowerShell has an alias for the thing that you're trying to execute, like dir. You're going to get you're going to get child item, not the command line.
Correct.
If you were expecting,
Like xcopy, you can still run xcopy. Yeah. But you can also code it in PowerShell. You can do a for each loop or whatever, or pipeline. Get this, copy to that, for each, whatever. You could write all that, and you can also use what's built in, or if it's still too many lines of code or more than you want to deal with, it's like, I just don't want to deal with all this error handling and what ifs. Maybe somebody's got a module that's already done that. Maybe it's already got really beautiful, robust error handling. It gives me back nice, pretty errors. It handles all the exceptions that I'd be running into. Put it in a test environment, verify it, talk to friends. Yeah, I use this one. It works great. We use it at Corporation XYZ for years, and it's great. Okay, I'll try it. Then you go and you go, oh, that saved me 20, 30, 100, 1,000 lines of code, by one line. So here's an example using Carbon. Carbon's more or less a Swiss Army knife of utilities for Windows. Has all kinds of stuff. And we use it a lot in DevOps. We use it a lot in just general system configuration automation. So you can do things like check for and set who can run as a service. Things like that. A lot of times people do it with a GPO. Okay, well, what if you just want to do it on one server? Is it worth spinning up a whole GPO and an OU, security filtering for that, or just run on one line? And dovetailing off of John Morgan's session earlier on using PowerShell for configuration items to control configuration drift of things, you can use that same approach within Config Manager to look for, is it out? Okay, then fire this at it to fix it. And do I need to write 20 lines, or can I call a module and do it one line? So that's all one line. I just had to split it to fit. So they use C in front of it. So most modules, they'll prefix their commandlets with a common prefix, so it's easier to kind of do a filter on the names of the commands. So you don't have to, but it's recommended. Also, if they just say grant permission, and Microsoft had a grant permission, you'd get name conflicts and confusion. So theirs all have grant C this, test C that. So the folder path, the identity is a group name. So in that case, it's two variables, what folder, what group. And it says, okay, I want to grant permission full on that folder to that group and apply it to, I know it's a long enumeration, but it's container and child containers and child leaves. It means this folder and subfolder and all files. So if you're used to looking in the GUI, that's what that, same thing. And type allow, so it's saying allow, not deny. So one line, I can grant permissions on files and folders. I can put that in a loop and hit 100,000 folders. This example here came from a project where we had to hit, I don't know, like 75 or 100 machines scattered around that were all on the line all online at that time, and open up permissions on a folder like right now. We couldn't like deploy it and wait for it. It had to happen right now because it was holding people up. So whatever app they were using wasn't able to write to a folder. That let them do it. Okay, so that's one example using Carbon. Carbon has a whole bunch of other stuff in there. I won't go deep into Carbon. It's got a lot of utilities for just general Windows system admin stuff. Files, folders, registries, services, processes, security. It's ranked pretty high in the PowerShell gallery, which has a popularity rating of who downloads stuff the most. Same with Chocolatey. So check it out. They didn't pay me for that either. Get results from a database using DBA tools. DBA tools is a module that's for SQL Server. It just encapsulates a bunch of commands that you used to have to do a lot more writing to do. Things like querying databases, writing to tables, reading from them. Give me a list of the tables. Give me a list of the views, stored procedures, functions. Tell me about the server. Tell me about the databases. You can back out, look at it from a DBA level or down at a developer level. So in this case, this example is, what server, DB123, what database. There's a SQL query expression, which you just select distinct name from workstations where department equals 5, and then just fire it off. That comes back with an array like a record set. I can take that and do something with it, or I can just pipe it right to a CSV file, or render it to HTML. And another example using a module. Again, you can write all these functions yourself. There's plenty of examples out there you can search on the web to write your own functions to go do this. And the reason I chose to do this topic, by the way, I probably didn't even cover that. So I work as a consultant. I go in a lot of customer environments, and it's never the same thing. It's always something different when I go in. One of the common things I see is a lot of people making their own tools, and they don't need to. It's real common, and then people are, already, everybody here is probably familiar with do more with less, and now great, congratulations, you have 3 jobs instead of 1, and we're paying you for the lowest of those, by the way. And so too bad for your guy that was here next to you, that desk, you can take his chair. So now you got 3 things to do, and they always say it takes time to save time, right? So you're like, oh great, I need to automate, but I don't have time to automate, I'm too busy putting out fires. Well, one of the quickest ways you can do things is when you're getting ready to start the next task, try not to go do it all yourself. First thing you should do is look to see if somebody's done it. And that's not always just going to Google, because a lot of times Google will just show you somebody who wrote their own bunch of code. You're copying it and running it, so okay, it works, but now I need to change it to work with this one, and then now it doesn't work. And then you're stuck in this debug test loop, right? Versus grabbing a module that's sort of like, hey, here's a one-size-fits-all, everything's documented, it even gives you help while you're typing the parameters to tell you what it's expecting. If you screw up, it'll catch you and tell you. So this one here, it's called Import Excel. It's written by a guy named David Finke. I believe he's a PowerShell MVP. If I'm messing that up, but it's a really nice module for reading and writing Excel, even without Excel on the machine. So you don't need Excel on the machine to do that. So there's plenty of tools that'll like open up Excel under the hood. A lot of them use COM. They'll say, new object type is COM, Excel.application, and then go do all that. Or they'll just launch command line. You don't even need that. And there it is. That's 1 line. So actually that's 2 lines. One says give me the laptops, and one just says give me the names. I'm actually going to demo these here in a minute if I'm doing okay on time, right? Yeah, I think I'm running close. All right, so checking for updates, get Windows Update, a 1-liner for patching machines, and there's also a computer name argument. So you could fire this off against a list of machines. Right? So if you don't have System Center, you don't have WSUS, or you do and you just need to do something one-off, like, I have WSUS, but I can't wait for these machines to go through that cycle. I need to patch them now before they go off the workbench, because I got to do like 100 at a time and get them out the door. I've also seen this used in task sequences. I actually have a customer right now that in SCCM with a task sequence that does a bare metal Windows 10 install, firing that off at one of the remote offices because they don't have a DP, number 1, that's another distribution point server for anybody who's not familiar with System Center. It's like a local server that they can go to instead of having to go all the way back to corporate. They're just using that one right there to say, go give me all the updates and just patch the machine. Not perfect, not ideal, not always recommended, but it works for them. And they only have 2 guys maintaining a pretty busy operation. So that saved them a ton of work having to worry about patching. Brought their patch compliance pretty good, actually, like 98%, where they were like at 55. So 1 line of code. They didn't have to go write anything or figure it out. There's also a YouTube video, a link down here at the bottom. Sorry, that's to the other slide. That's a goof on my part. That's for Excel. Any questions before I move on? I'm kind of bowling through this. You guys are still awake. Getting names from AD. So one of the common tasks is getting a list of computer names. So where am I getting it from? Somebody handing me a file, or they tell me to go get it from AD or from a database. There's a lot of modules out there ready to use. So if you have Active Directory installed or RSAT on your workstation, you can use get AD computer or AD group member. In this case, I just want to get the names of things that are in a group. This happens to be a group of computers, and I want to get the name property. So you'll see people do get and then pipe to select name. This is the same thing as doing select dash expand property. So you don't get back the heading with the values, you get back just the values. Sound familiar? Okay. That's a shorthand way of doing it. The downside is, by the way, if you screw up the middle of it and it blows up, air handling's a little weird, but there's ways around that. If you don't have RSAT, and you can't have RSAT, sorry?
I was just gonna say, or if if it returns no
Yes. Yeah.
no data, you now have a null object which has no name property.
Yeah.
I just got bit by that one yesterday.
Yeah, trying to stuff a cat in the bathtub. So, if you don't, thank you, by the way. If you don't have, if you're not on a domain controller and you don't have RSAT installed, so anybody not familiar with what RSAT is? I keep throwing that name out there. Everybody's good with that? Okay. If you don't have RSAT, you don't have the group policy, or excuse me, the Active Directory PowerShell module that it installs. There is another module you can install, and you can install it as user context, which is ADSI PS. Okay, and it just uses the older ADSI interface to get to Active Directory. It's got almost all the same commands, not all of them, but it has a lot of them, like get group member, user, all that stuff. And the properties it returns are almost identical as far as the format. So it's a really nice fallback. I have some people that use that where they are not allowed to install RSAT. They don't have admin rights. They're not allowed to have RSAT because InfoSec doesn't want them to have it. But they still have to get a list of computer names to do whatever they do for their job. So that gets them by. They can install that in their user context and use that one. So if there's any InfoSec people watching this going, how dare he just give them a workaround? Sorry. Okay. I know I kind of blasted through this. I think we're almost out of time. These are some modules I've covered and a few I didn't really have time to cover. If you do any imaging of Windows 10, OSD Builder is really nice. That's a PowerShell module that'll let you prepare your own custom images for Windows 10. So extract ISO, patch the ISO with the service updates, cumulative updates, take out features, add features like .NET 3.5, remove Candy Crush, and then when it's done, pack it up into a thumb drive, ISO, a WIM file, folder share. So you can take that, pump it right into SCCM and use that as a more or less a CI/CD type approach to keeping your imaging up to date. So you're not always depending on the task sequence to patch the machine after its image. You can have it come in already close to being fully patched. POS 365 is written by a friend of mine. Shout out to Kevin Blumenfeld. That's a set of library functions for dealing with Exchange Online, Office 365. It's got some really nice automation tools on top of what those things provide. Platy PS is for making markdown files. I've covered that in a PowerShell meetup for Charlotte, I think a month ago or 2 months ago. Documenting your code. So if you do comment-based help in your code, if you just do your little tags and put in your description, synopsis, description, parameter, and all that, you document it, that will pull it out and generate markdown files for you. A lot of places will use that to automatically document their stuff. So as long as their developers seed the plantation right, it'll come along and pull up all the crop and put it on the pages for you. That was a bad analogy. And I already covered AD, SIPS. What if you need to make a module? Okay, when would it might be better? Let's say you've got a custom system internal, HR, POs, whatever. I used a purchase order system as an example. Basically, you want to write a bunch of functions that deal with this internal purchase order system and maybe link it up to whatever else, your asset inventory system. You might have a whole library of functions. You might have one PS1 file that has a get, a set, give me the users, give me the POs, give me the ones that are open, the ones that are closed, give me them by department, give me them by type of thing, whatever, by location, whatever. And you might have this whole growing library. Rather than passing that file around, you could make it part of a module. And that is you install it and you expose those files or those functions as more cleanly. And you can also provide better documentation and support. So the idea is that you take one PS1 file and you have a collection of these script files, right? Each of them is notice the syntax in there. I have a parameter, set. There's no word function in those. I don't have any functions. These are just standalone scripts. And there's some examples of how you probably typically would use those, right? You're just calling them at the command line and getting back what you get. Right? So that becomes your toolbox. And each of those becomes your tool. And the idea is you can take that, you create your manifest. I got crazy with the animation here, sorry. And so if your manifest that describes it, you have your PSM1, which can either load the functions from your files. It acts like a traffic cop, if you will. This is one way to do it, that's why I called it A. And here's your script that you had. You take it and convert it to a function. Then all you do is wrap it, essentially, right? And that goes in and becomes your module function. How was that for animation? Nobody noticed. 2 in the morning on that one. So the other way you can do it, which you'll see commonly, is people will just take all those and just put them in one PSM1 file, which is essentially like a PS1 with everything in it. And so one of the advantages, if I install a module, I don't have to find the folder where I put those PS1 files. I have a module there. All I have to do is just type the function name. Windows is going to find it and run it.
So if I've got multiple functions within a PS1 file, if I started off just my initial package is all of the functions that are related to doing a specific task are in one PS1 file. Is that a fairly straightforward, you know, it just rename it as a PSM1 file?
Pretty much.
But then I need the PSD.
Yeah, and there's a way to create that. There's a function called new module manifest. You type it and you point it. It has some parameters like, okay, what's the module? You put the path to the PSM1 file, and then you give it the name. I think the path statement is going to be like the name of it .psd1, and then you can fill out the rest, or it'll just fill out a blank template and you can fill it in later, like
so
author.
It won't look at what's in the PSM1 file and create a skeleton with those, you know, I've got this function, and this function.
No, because it wants you to control what you want exposed to the user. You can hide those. So you can have like helper functions, like, okay, here's the ones I want you to use, but this one's going to call some of my private functions, if you will. You don't have to expose those. Like DBA tools, almost all these modules I'm talking about have private and public functions for the most part. Some of them are very trivial, like just go find this stuff, okay, then pass it back here to the one that you're using. They give you that control. So you have there's a section called exported functions. Do I have time? This is going to cut me off.
Functions to export.
Yeah, I'm until 4:15. Right?
You should have till
right?
4:20.
4:20. Okay, good number. I don't know if I'm going to have time to do this before it cuts me off.
I'm sorry. To export. It's on the green post-it in your slideshow.
Which one?
Slideshow.
Slideshow. Back to that.
Yeah.
Why is it
It's
jumping
on
up?
the PSD1. Functions to export.
Yeah, thank you. Right there. So you'd have an array there where you tell the names of the functions. Okay. So that's option B. You can just put everything in one file. That's fine if you're doing a small project and it's only one of you working on it, but if you have a team working on it and they're going to split up who's working on what, you probably want to do separate files. It's a lot easier that way. Like, hey, you take that function, you take that function. Everybody just check their stuff, you know, that kind of thing. And then you wouldn't really have to import module, but there. So if you're not pulling it off the gallery, you still would do import if it's coming from like a network share. That's one time when you would use import function, like import module. Import module from my internal server and then use my function, because it's not going to just find it there. It's not in the default path. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Best practices. Number 1, get it working. Too many people get really wrapped around the axle when they first start writing a module, trying to make it perfect right out of the gate. Don't worry about that. Just make sure it doesn't break anything and it doesn't eat the CPU alive. Okay? Just make sure it works, it finishes, and it gets by. It may not be pretty. You can always pretty it up. But that's step 1, is to get it worked out. That's assuming you've done it. Step 2, clean it up, add some documentation. It's important to add documentation. I can't stress that enough. Because you might go home one day and get hit by a bus. The next guy's not going to know what you were working on. What does this thing do? You know, they pick it up, they go, I don't know, throw it away. No, don't throw that away. That thing was critical to the payroll system. I've seen that happen. And then 3, clean it up later. Refactor. Everybody here familiar with the word refactor, the term, what it means? Anybody not? Nobody not? Okay. Refactor. Even when you've written something months ago. clean it up later. Refactor. Everybody here familiar with the word refactor?